On the morning of July 15, 2022, at 5 a.m., before the first light of dawn appeared, an emergency 911 call was made by a neighbor from a quiet residential area. The caller, speaking with great concern, reported a serious altercation unfolding between a man and a woman in a nearby apartment. According to the caller's description, the situation seemed highly tense, with a woman allegedly shouting, swearing, and violently attacking the man, creating a chaotic and alarming scene. The neighbor mentioned hearing loud shouting, the sounds of breaking furniture, and other powerful noises coming from inside the apartment, making them feel extremely uneasy and unable to ignore the situation. Concerned for the safety of those involved, especially given the unclear severity of the incident, the neighbor immediately contacted authorities, requesting urgent intervention. This emergency call quickly caught the attention of the police, and the necessary forces were immediately deployed to the scene to assess the situation and evaluate the level of danger. With thorough preparation, the officers were ready to face any complex scenario that might unfold. In such situations, ensuring the safety of everyone involved, including family members, was the police's top priority. They understood that every second counted in determining the safety and stability of the surrounding community. The police were not only there to handle the incident, but also to prevent any potential harm, particularly in cases that might involve domestic violence. From the 911 call, law enforcement received valuable information about the tense situation between a man and a woman. While the initial details from the caller were vague and unclear in many aspects, the concern for the seriousness of the event prompted the police to take immediate action. This urgency was amplified when the case was identified as possibly involving domestic violence, an issue that cannot be taken lightly and must be addressed promptly to prevent serious consequences. Domestic violence, whether it involves a minor altercation or severe physical assault, has long-lasting effects on the victims, both physically and emotionally. Therefore, the quick and timely response of law enforcement in this case was crucial. It was not just about ensuring the safety of those directly involved, but also sending a powerful message that the community has the support of law enforcement when facing domestic violence. With the severity of the incident potentially escalating at any moment, the police understood that every moment of delay could make the situation harder to control. Even though they did not have all the detailed information, they decided to act immediately, ready to respond to any situation, protect those involved, and prevent any potential threats. This timely action demonstrated not only the police force's sense of responsibility, but also underscored the importance of swift intervention in domestic violence cases to protect vulnerable individuals and maintain social order. After receiving the emergency call reporting a domestic altercation, the police immediately dispatched personnel and quickly moved toward the scene to begin their investigation. With experience and caution, they knew that domestic violence is always fraught with unpredictable dangers that must be addressed promptly to prevent serious consequences. Upon approaching the area near the apartment where the incident occurred, the officers spotted a man walking nearby, seemingly trying to leave the area, possibly due to the tense situation that had just transpired. The police immediately noticed a suspicious detail. The man had visible injuries on his neck, suggesting a possible attack. These injuries not only signified physical pain but also raised suspicions that the man could be the victim in the altercation that had been reported by the neighbor through the 911 call. Given the clear signs on the man's body, the police immediately hypothesized that the altercation might be related to him and decided to investigate further to clarify the situation. The officers needed to be cautious and thorough when approaching the man, as they were not only dealing with a potential domestic violence situation but also had to ensure that all their actions were appropriate and legal, without escalating the tension or endangering anyone involved. Upon further observation, the police noticed the man's anxious and tense behavior, which further raised suspicions that he might indeed be the victim, or at least someone strongly affected by the altercation. The injuries on his body reinforced these concerns, prompting the officers to continue their investigation and ask the man for information to clarify any issues related to the incident. Upon noticing the man walking near the scene, the officers did not hesitate to signal for him to stop so they could verify his information. This decision was based on the initial signs and the information from the 911 call they had received earlier. The police explained that the man matched the description of a victim in the call, a man dressed in black, reportedly attacked by a woman wearing a pink shirt. The police could not overlook the potential connection between this man and the reported domestic violence case. Since domestic violence cases often involve complex dynamics that can lead to dangerous situations, it was essential for the officers to investigate cautiously. The police understood that they not only had to verify whether the man was a victim but also had to ensure the safety of everyone involved, including the woman in the incident and those around them. Amid the tension of the situation, the police explained that their actions were based on the need to thoroughly clarify the situation to ensure no one was in danger. They emphasized that their request for identification information was entirely legal and part of the process in investigating a domestic violence case, an issue that must be handled with great care to avoid any mistakes. The police were concerned not only about potential serious injuries to the victim but also about ensuring that the woman involved would be protected from any further violent incidents. The police's explanations were very cautious and considered, as they did not want to escalate the tension but also had to act decisively to prevent any potential dangers while the situation remained unclear. However, the situation quickly escalated when the man began to display a clear lack of cooperation, which complicated the already tense atmosphere. Initially, the police only wanted to verify the situation quickly and effectively, but instead of cooperating, the man refused to provide any information about himself. He rejected all requests from the officers, including giving his name or basic identification details. This not only confused the police but also raised suspicions about the man's motives and honesty, creating an even more concerning situation for everyone involved. The police explained to him that they were simply carrying out their duties according to the proper procedures to investigate the incident, and they had no intention of causing him any trouble or making things difficult for him. However, his lack of cooperation made the situation even more tense as he stubbornly refused to provide any information and resisted being checked or detained. The man's defiant attitude seemed to make it harder for the police to manage the situation, as they could not be sure whether he was a victim or a suspect in the altercation. His refusal not only complicated the police's efforts to gather information but also raised questions about whether he might be involved in criminal activity and whether there were risks to anyone involved in the situation. With his strong refusal to cooperate, the police were forced to consider stricter measures to ensure that the situation did not develop in a negative direction. This could include requesting additional support from colleagues, applying security checks, or even taking actions such as making an arrest if necessary. Although the police always tried to remain calm and explain the purpose of their checks, their inability to resolve the man's resistance immediately made everything more tense, as any action they took could lead to a dangerous situation or legal complications. The man's refusal to cooperate not only exacerbated the situation but also forced the police to face a decision fraught with tension and difficulty. While they simply wanted to carry out their duties quickly and effectively, his firm refusal to provide any information posed a significant challenge for law enforcement. Now, the police had to decide whether to continue insisting on getting the man's information and cooperation or whether they needed to take stronger measures to ensure the safety of everyone involved. If they chose to continue investigating without the man's cooperation, they would face certain risks. The lack of accurate information could prevent the police from determining the true nature of the incident, possibly leading to mistakes or missteps in the investigation process. On the other hand, if they were forced to take stronger actions, such as making an arrest or using force to control the situation, this could lead to an even more tense and escalated confrontation. Especially with the unclear level of danger posed by the man, deciding whether to arrest him could have serious legal and social consequences for both the police and the man himself. This situation was especially sensitive because it involved not only the man's actions but also ensuring his legal rights while maintaining public order. The police had to consider all factors, from the possibility that the man was simply a victim of an attack to the chance that he might be a suspect in the altercation. At the same time, they had to weigh the potential dangers if the situation grew more tense, where a wrong decision could put everyone at risk. While maintaining calm and patience was important, the police could not overlook the need to act quickly and decisively to prevent regrettable consequences. The tension between the police and the man quickly escalated when the police asked him to provide identification information, such as his name, address, and other personal details, to verify his identity. This was an important step in the investigation to determine whether he was a suspect in the altercation they were investigating. The police explained clearly that they were simply taking necessary measures to ensure safety and complete their work legally, as the man closely resembled one of the suspects described in the 911 call from the neighbor. However, the man's refusal to cooperate made the situation even more tense. Not only did he refuse to comply with the request, but he also expressed frustration, asserting that he had done nothing wrong. He believed that the police's demand for his information was completely unreasonable, as he had not committed any crime and had no legitimate reason to be asked to provide such information. His defiant attitude made the police uneasy and concerned about the possibility that he could be a potential threat. The man not only refused to provide any information but also stated that he was under no obligation to do so, further escalating the conflict and making the situation more difficult to resolve. The cause of this tension was more than just a matter of identification. The officers had to be mindful that domestic violence situations are often clouded by confusion and fear. As a result, even an innocent person could behave defensively and refuse cooperation under the stress of the situation. On the other hand, the officers also had to be alert to the possibility that the man could be a perpetrator, and his refusal to cooperate could indicate an attempt to hide something. The man's stiff attitude and lack of cooperation created a tense situation, making the atmosphere increasingly heavy. When he refused to provide information and opposed the police's requests, the tension between the two parties became even more apparent. Faced with the man's uncooperative behavior, the police had to patiently and clearly explain their authority in this situation. They emphasized that, according to the law, they had the right to request and receive identification information from anyone they suspected of being involved in a crime. The police explained that asking for information was not an invasion or violation of privacy, but a necessary step in the investigation process to verify identity and clarify any possible doubts. Although the man was not immediately accused of a crime, the signs and circumstances surrounding him made the police stay alert. The injuries on his body, especially those on his neck, made them suspect he could be a victim of an attack. Additionally, the details from the 9/11 report matched the man's appearance. The police had enough reasonable grounds to request his cooperation because these details not only led them to believe the case might involve domestic violence, but also placed them in a position where they had to clarify all information to ensure everyone's safety. Nevertheless, explaining the police's authority to the man was not an easy task. In tense situations, where personal rights and freedom are being tested, not everyone easily accepts legal reasoning without feeling threatened. The man, in this case, might feel offended or imposed upon, especially when he insisted that he had done nothing wrong. However, the police had to remain firm in carrying out their duties while maintaining professionalism and patience to prevent the situation from becoming more complicated. They had to ensure that every action they took complied with the law, while also ensuring the safety of themselves and others during the investigation. However, even though the police tried to explain their authority and the reasons for requesting information, it didn't reduce the man's suspicions and tension. On the contrary, the police's explanation seemed to make him feel even more unfairly treated. He began expressing frustration and disagreement with being asked for personal information, claiming that it was an invasion of his privacy. From the man's perspective, the police's request for information was not just an unnecessary interference but an abuse of power, as he felt he hadn't committed any crime or done anything suspicious. As the feeling of oppression and unfairness grew, the man not only refused to cooperate but also showed clear signs of discomfort, even challenging the authorities. The more he expressed his disagreement, the more the atmosphere became tense and oppositional, with the police force trying to carry out their duty on one side and the man feeling threatened and imposed upon on the other. Every word he spoke was full of dissatisfaction and resistance, turning the situation from a request for information into a heated verbal confrontation. Both sides, with their firm stances, insisted on defending their views. The police continued to hold that requesting information was completely legal and necessary for the investigation, while the man refused to accept it, insisting he didn't need to cooperate. Their verbal conflict not only increased the tension but also made the resolution of the situation more complex than ever. This situation not only interrupted the investigation process but also highlighted the conflict between the authority of law enforcement and the personal rights of a citizen, which further deepened the divide between the two sides, making it impossible to find common ground. The disagreements between the man and the police were not just temporary tension in a specific situation but reflected deeper conflicts over authority and personal freedom. In this context, the man felt his privacy rights were being violated, a fundamental right every citizen has. He viewed the police's request for personal information as an infringement on his freedom, believing he had no reason to be suspected and shouldn't have to undergo unnecessary scrutiny. To him, it was an unreasonable intervention into his private space, increasing the sense of being threatened and imposed upon. However, from the police's perspective, their actions were entirely legal and necessary to fulfill their duties. The police were not simply conducting an administrative check, they were dealing with a situation potentially involving domestic violence, a serious issue that needed to be addressed promptly. With limited information from the 911 call and the unusual signs on the man's body, the police had reason to suspect he could be involved in the altercation they were investigating. Therefore, requesting their personal information was not an invasion of privacy but a necessary step to verify and protect public order. The conflict between the police's authority and the man's personal freedom highlighted an important issue in modern society: how to balance ensuring security and respecting personal rights. The police have a duty to protect public order and security, but they must also respect the fundamental rights of citizens, including personal freedom and privacy. However, in situations like this, where a serious issue like domestic violence could be involved, the police's request for information is necessary, even though it may make the public feel uncomfortable or even violated. Ultimately, these disagreements are not only a reflection of a specific situation but also reflect a larger issue concerning the relationship between power and personal rights in society. When law enforcement is carrying out their duties while also having to protect personal freedom, handling such situations always requires sensitivity and understanding from both sides. After determining that the man might be a victim in the altercation and continuing their investigation, the police did not hesitate to approach the woman involved. When they found her, they confirmed that she was part of the ongoing argument, which made the situation increasingly complex. The police, with the responsibility of clarifying the case, quickly began questioning the woman to understand all aspects of her involvement and motivations, as well as her behavior in the incident. This interrogation was extremely important, not only to determine the victim's status but also to assess whether she was the perpetrator in the attack. According to the initial description from the emergency call, the woman was accused of shouting and possibly attacking the man. These details raised suspicion and painted a picture of a serious domestic violence case. This concern became clearer when the witness's description seemed to match the unfolding events the police were facing. However, when meeting and talking directly with the woman, new details started to emerge, gradually changing the initial view of the case. During the interrogation, the woman appeared calm and provided explanations about the situation. She insisted that everything was just a normal argument and that her shouting was not an act of violence or assault. She even emphasized that she had no intention of harming the man and that everything had been misunderstood. This created a clear contradiction between what the police had received from the 911 call and the woman's testimony. Despite this, investigators could not overlook the inconsistencies in her story and decided to continue probing for more information carefully. At this point, the police were faced with a complex situation: how to determine the truth when the information from both sides contradicted each other. The following conversations would be key to clarifying missing details and resolving the suspicions they had. However, the woman's story continued to present new situations. Was she really a victim of an attack, or was she the perpetrator in a more complex case than just a simple argument? The truth was still being sought, and the police's job was to investigate thoroughly, collect all evidence and testimonies, to ensure that justice would be carried out fairly and accurately. During the interrogation, The woman offered a rather surprising explanation about the situation she and the man were facing. She insisted that the argument between the two was not a serious act of violence, but simply a regular dispute in their relationship, which had already experienced tensions beforehand. According to her, this was not a case of intentional harm, but rather an unwanted conflict that happened in a moment of anger. She also strongly denied any violent actions towards the man. She maintained that she had no intention to hit or harm him. According to her, everything was just a misunderstanding in a moment of temporary anger that neither of them could control. The woman believed that all the injuries and signs on the man's body could have resulted from situations that occurred while they were arguing. Perhaps in a tense moment, some accidental actions led to him getting hurt, but she insisted that it was not an act of intentional violence. Part of the woman's testimony was that she had been provoked and accidentally hurt herself in her anger. This reflected the complexity of the situation they were both facing. Instead of admitting to harming the man, she suggested that the injuries on his body were actually the result of accidental actions, even self-inflicted in a moment of uncontrolled anger. This explanation not only made the situation more complicated, but also raised many questions of doubt. The police had to assess this testimony carefully because there was a significant difference between a normal argument and a real act of violent assault. Was she truly innocent, or was she trying to blame her own agitation to lessen her responsibility? These details would need to be clarified by continuing to gather information and evidence from all parties involved to ensure that all aspects of the case were viewed accurately and fairly. In her explanation, the woman continued to assert that the long-term relationship between her and the man was not a continuous series of conflicts and arguments. She admitted that in a long and challenging relationship, conflicts are inevitable, but she emphasized that there was never any intention or desire to hurt the man. According to her, the arguments were simply a natural part of the relationship, part of the process of seeking harmony and mutual understanding, without any violence or malice involved. She also argued that the police intervention in this matter might stem from a serious misunderstanding by outsiders, those who only heard the noise or witnessed part of the incident without understanding the full context. She explained that from the outside, things might have seemed like a serious altercation, but in reality, it was just a heated argument. To her, the situation had been blown out of proportion and did not reflect the true nature of the situation. Furthermore, the woman firmly stated that if possible, she certainly would not have wanted things to escalate and become as serious as they did. She did not want the situation to be pushed too far, leading to the intervention of authorities and potentially affecting both of them. This statement of hers not only expressed regret about the situation, but also showed her desire to return to peace in her relationship without outside interference. She felt that everything could have been resolved internally if not for the involvement of outside factors, such as the neighbor hearing noise or the police intervening. Her explanation once again pointed to an important aspect of this relationship: the misunderstandings and different perceptions between those involved and outsiders. Outsiders, such as neighbors, might not fully understand the internal conflicts, leading them to make mistaken judgments. However, this also raises the question of whether this misunderstanding could be exploited or complicate the situation further. Although she denied the accusations of assault, the discrepancies between the testimonies still need to be clarified through investigation and evidence gathering. Even though the woman explained and justified her actions, claiming that no violence took place, the police must continue their investigation thoroughly to clarify all details of the case. The reason for this is that, in an investigation, it is not enough to rely solely on the testimony of one party without independent verification from other involved parties and credible evidence. The investigation process requires gathering all relevant information, from the testimonies of those present at the scene, physical and medical evidence, to reports from specialized agencies, to ensure that every aspect of the case is clarified fairly and accurately. One of the most important factors in the investigation is the discrepancy between the woman's testimony and the signs on the man's body, particularly the serious injuries he sustained. Although the woman claimed these injuries might have been caused by her accidentally hurting herself in a moment of anger, the police need to determine whether the injuries on the man could have been the result of an attack from her. These signs will play a key role in determining whether domestic violence actually occurred. Therefore, the investigation should not only involve listening to the woman's explanation but also cross-checking with other evidence. The police must examine factors such as the man's health condition, whether there was external intervention, or if there is evidence of excessive agitation leading to self-harm. At the same time, witnesses, including the neighbor who reported the incident, will play an important role in providing additional information about the situation. The police cannot allow the discrepancies between the testimonies to become a hindrance in verifying the truth. Every detail, no matter how small, could alter the way the case is evaluated, so every step of the investigation needs to be carried out cautiously and impartially. Only when there is enough clear evidence and confirmation from the relevant parties can the police make a final conclusion about the nature of the case and whether domestic violence charges need to be filed. Even though the woman continuously insisted that she did nothing wrong and believed the argument between her and the man was simply a misunderstanding, the police could not overlook the suspicious signs and must continue to conduct a careful investigation to clarify all the details of the case. The police's responsibility in this situation is not only to verify the testimonies of the involved parties, but also to protect the law and ensure that any acts of violence, whether they occurred or not, are taken seriously. The police's actions are not merely a reaction to one party's testimony, but also a commitment to following legal procedures to protect the rights and safety of those involved in the case. When there are signs of domestic violence, even if the woman's testimony denies all allegations, the police must continue investigating to verify the truth. Intervening in family matters is not an unfounded act, but a crucial preventive measure to stop possible violence that could harm one or both parties. In this context, the police's investigative actions not only aim to protect the man, but also reflect their concern about detecting potential domestic violence situations. They need to determine whether there are any factors that could lead to violence within this family and assess the situation comprehensively, from the relationship between the parties to the psychological and behavioral factors of each individual. Signs such as the injuries on the man's body and discrepancies in the woman's testimony are crucial elements the police must clarify. Moreover, the police's intervention also reflects a societal responsibility to prevent and address domestic violence issues, which are sensitive and complex. Even when the woman denies any wrongdoing, the police's interrogation and verification of the situation are part of their effort to protect not only an individual but the community as a whole. The police have a duty to ensure that this denial does not obscure the evidence and signs that could lead to the case being handled properly. Therefore, whether the woman denies wrongdoing or not, the police cannot skip the necessary investigation steps to ensure the case is handled properly. This is part of their job to uphold the law, protect the victims, and ensure that any domestic violence is thoroughly investigated and treated with seriousness. However, during the investigation, the situation quickly escalated as the woman became increasingly tense, and her strong reactions toward the police became more evident. Although she continued repeating her explanations of innocence and insisting the argument was merely a misunderstanding, the determination and pressure from the police began to make her lose control. Her initial calm and logical responses started changing into a clear adversarial attitude. The woman not only refused to cooperate, but also showed strong resistance to the police's demands. She began shouting and making challenging gestures, causing the atmosphere at the scene to become tense and confrontational. Her actions, such as waving her hands or making uncontrolled gestures, created a clear opposition to the police, making the already complicated situation even more dangerous and harder to control. The police, while understanding the need to remain calm and act according to legal procedures, could no longer ignore the increasingly evident signs of her lack of cooperation and hostile attitude. Although the police tried to stay calm and explain to the woman the reasons for their investigative steps and request her cooperation, the situation showed no signs of calming down. She not only refused to cooperate but also continuously acted in defiance, prompting the police to decide whether to apply stronger measures to ensure the safety of all parties involved and continue the investigation legally. This escalation is part of the tense relationship between the police's authority and the woman's resistance, who felt under pressure and did not understand the authorities' intervention in her private matter. The more the police tried to explain and clarify the situation, The heart of the woman became to control, which created a conflict between the parties and complicated the investigation process. The police, while trying to follow procedures, had to deal with a situation where the woman's behavior not only disrupted the investigation but also required them to apply stricter control measures to prevent the situation from escalating further. This situation not only reflects the disagreement between the parties but also highlights the underlying tension in law enforcement, especially when personal freedom conflicts with the power of the authorities. The police, while trying to maintain order and handle the case professionally, had to face the increasing resistance from the woman, which further complicated the investigation and handling of the situation. The situation quickly escalated to a climax when the woman began directly confronting the police officers. Initially, the police hoped that their intervention would help resolve a simple domestic argument. However, when the officers tried to control the situation and ensure the safety of everyone at the scene, the woman reacted strongly, beyond control. She not only refused to cooperate but also took aggressive actions, which could even be considered as assaulting the police officers on duty. This marked a clear turning point in the situation, where a family argument, which initially seemed like a simple misunderstanding, suddenly turned into a serious matter involving criminal behavior. The woman, instead of cooperating and explaining the situation calmly, exacerbated the situation by directly resisting the authorities and even engaging in violent acts toward the police. This not only violated the law but also made the case much more complicated and serious than what the officers had initially anticipated. In this situation, the police had no choice but to apply more stringent measures to protect themselves and maintain order at the scene. They not only had to deal with a family altercation but also a tense situation where the woman's violent behavior posed a danger to them and others present. The decisions made at this point became crucial because the situation had moved beyond a simple argument and had become a case that could lead to serious legal consequences. This also reflects the complexity of law enforcement, where a situation that starts with a simple personal issue can quickly turn into a serious event, requiring the police to act swiftly and decisively. The police are not only facing the challenge from the woman but also the risk of more serious offenses occurring, threatening the safety and public order. Applying strict control measures, although necessary in this situation, also creates tension between protecting individual rights and enforcing the law, a matter that every law enforcement agency must carefully consider. The conflict between the two sides is no longer limited to a mere argument between a couple, but has turned into a more serious issue when the woman refused to cooperate and even engaged in violent actions. The police are no longer just dealing with a family altercation but now face a situation that has escalated, requiring urgent and proper intervention to prevent any further escalation. This situation, more than just a misunderstanding, has become a complex case of public safety and law enforcement.